Talking some SEC football. John Reed, Jesse Simonton, take two. What's up, Jesse? How you doing, brother?
Hey, man. Let's run it back.
Let's do it. I am slowly getting into football mode. It always creeps up on me. I try to pace myself. A lot of people think like SEC media days, like practice, that's whenever like, hey, football season's here. Yeah. But then it still kind of drags and you kind of start like having to deal with the same recycled topics. So years ago, I learned you got to pace yourself. You can't go too hard just when the clock turns to August. So I'm working my way up though. I'm getting into preseason mode.
Yeah, you got to. It's turning those muscles back into shape. That's what it is. You can't go back. You can't go to the gym and just start maxing out every day on the bench or deadlift. If you've taken off 6 months, you got to kind of slowly ease back into it. Otherwise, you're just inhaling cigarettes, and it's going to be a tough night.
It's a good comparison. Whenever the teams get back out there for camp, that they go a couple days without pads on to get ready, get used to the heat. That's what we're doing here. All right, sounds good. Let's start. I took some listener questions to get some people got a lot of feedback from the first episode of people that liked us talking, said they wanted to hear it again. So they gave us some questions to discuss, and we'll start with the big news of the week, the coaches poll. I don't know how much stock you put into the coaches poll. I don't give it too much credibility. How do you feel about it?
Oh, I give it very little credibility, especially because we know that the coaches don't actually participate in this thing. They have their names on it, but it's the SIDs that are actually doing the voting. Having said that, I am a big proponent and fan that I think preseason polls are good. I think they generate a lot of good banter to kind of gin up support. There's been a lot of, Adam Rittenberg, who I respect a lot. He's a really good columnist, reporter at ESPN. He kind of wrote this big deal about a week ago that was basically like, let's get rid of preseason polls. Could not feel, more differently. I think that history says that they don't actually impact, the Danny Cannells and these people claim that it has like the biggest bias on how the season ultimately plays out. History says that's not actually the case. And for good measure, I just think they create good content. They create good banter, like this coaches poll, which whether the coaches did it or not, I think they probably got the top of the rankings fairly right. I was surprised at some of the teams that did not actually make the top 25, but again, that's why it's fun.
Yeah, for years I've been saying I don't like the polls just because I do feel like, the Texas Notre Dame game, what was that, 2015, 16? When was that? When Texas was back because they beat top 10 Notre Dame and then turned around and lost the next week. And all of a sudden you start letting these coaches start piling up top 10 wins, beating teams that probably aren't top 10 teams. And I do hate the way that kind of affects the season, but I am in the content game. So I do agree with you in terms of it creating a lot of talking points, a lot of fodder. I feel the same way about the weekly rollouts of the playoff rankings, right? Like they tell us all the time, these rankings are fluid. We can tell you one thing one week and then turn around and do something completely different in a couple of weeks. It doesn't really matter, but it gives us something to talk about on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday as we get ready for games.
I do think that the ranking show is absurd. I am wholeheartedly agree with you there. I have fought for a long time with folks that think, college football, it is that folks like to say this about sports in general, that it's entertainment. No, it is entertaining, but it actually has consequences. Those shows are entertainment. And that's literally what they exist for. Because as we've seen, like basically the committee can pretty much, hem and haw their way through, 6 weeks of rankings and then say at the end, this is what we're going to do. And this is, why it matters. And everything else we said previously really doesn't matter.
Yeah, I would love it. Those shows were like 15 minutes. They give you the rankings. They give you a little bit of the outrage. Then they go away. But instead, they usually drag them out for an hour. But the coaches poll did come out. And Caleb wants your opinion on this. He said last year, Michigan and Florida State were both preseason top 10 and both finished unranked. Which two top 10 teams this year do you think are the most likely to suffer the same fate?
I think the volcanic take here is Georgia, but I don't think that's actually going to be the case because I think the floor for Kirby Smart is 9-3. I just think he's too good of a coach. I think there's too much talent there. So if I was actually to circle two teams here, I think pretty universally I would pick Miami because I think Christopher is a Christopher, and until he shows me that he can kind of win more of the games that he's supposed to. I mean, that team's going to be dominant, I think, in the trenches, offensive and defensive lines. I don't know what you're going to get from Carson Beck, though. I don't know what that receiving core is going to be like. They're replacing, just a lot of offensive talent. So that coupled with their schedule, if they lose a home game to Florida, I think they also play Notre Dame. You got those are two big games there. If you lose those, suddenly an 8-4 Miami might not be, ranked in the top 25 come season's in. And then it's LSU. And then I think, we kind of talked about LSU last week. I've been working on this kind of top 100 thoughts, John, for this kind of teaser newsletter that I'm going to be sporting out here before the season, and just kind of thoughts, predictions, kind of that stuff. And so doing some extra deep diving. LSU to me is just kind of the WTF team. I don't know. I mean, what do you think? I mean, now we're dealing with all these rumors with Nussmeier. Did he have a big injury or not? Folks are saying that he's going to be fine, but it's just, I don't know. I don't know what I'm going to get for the Tigers this year. So when you look at their season, the fact that they, open at Clemson, they have Alabama, A&M, that game against Oklahoma at the end of the season, who knows what those two teams are going to look like. So there's a very realistic possibility that LSU could be as good as playing for a, top 4 seed in the playoff to as volatile as being like, hey, we're not even in the top 25, come the end of November.
No, when you talk about, Miami, and very important to note also that going to be a huge, gigantic drop-off from Cam Ward to Carson Beck. I mean, put some respect on my boy. Like, they're going to really miss his leadership and his ability. LSU is interesting just because I do think whoever loses that week 1 matchup between them and Clemson, like, it just has the chance to go off the tracks a little bit, and maybe not come completely unraveled, but for LSU, it'd be 4 straight years losing the first game, losing the opener.
I think it'd actually be 6. It would be Brian Kelly's 4th straight, but it would be 6 overall.
Oh, wow. Okay, so that's even worse. But, yeah, I was just thinking during the Brian Kelly era. But, yeah, like he's talked about how they're putting all their eggs into this basket, right, how focused they are on Clemson. And, like, that's good. That's a good mentality if you win. If you lose, that feels like it could really, really deflate the team, deflate some guys. You talked about it a couple weeks ago, saying that, the transfer portal teams that are built there through there, how do they handle adversity? How could that impact them? And I think LSU would be a dangerous team to have that happen to week 1. The rest of them, I mean, Ohio State, Penn State, there's pretty much no way they finish unranked just because of their schedules. Notre Dame, I could see it, I could see it, but again, schedule pretty light. Finishing unranked would be pretty tough. They'd have to lose, the first game at Miami and then to A&M to really, like, even be in danger of being unranked at the end of the season. So I don't see them. Oregon, I got to be honest, for a team that finished the season ranked number 1, I feel like Oregon's been completely off of my radar this year. Like, what does Oregon have returning? How good are they supposed to be? I know Lanning's got them, completely loaded up with talent, but how good is Oregon actually going to be, Jesse?
Well, what if Dante Moore sucks? I mean,
right.
If Dante Moore sucks, then, Oregon could absolutely, potentially face plant. They have had a very quiet off season. The interesting thing with the Ducks is they're actually relying on more of their own talent that Lanning has finally recruited for the first time in several years. You know, they have been a pretty heavy portal team. That is not – they have some really good portal additions, particularly on the offensive line. But at playmaker and some of the other guys, they're counting on, you know, that 5-star, DeCorian Moore, you know, the wide receiver to kind of hit immediately. So, you know, they would not be my top choice, obviously. I just want to say one more thing about LSU because you mentioned them about the transfer portal. Brian Kelly has been kind of lauded, and the program, you know, writ large has been lauded this offseason that they finally did invest in the portal. That they, you know, last year he was crying poor. This year they spent the money. And yet, you know, you just went out to Vegas. You were out west. You know, out there. They got those fancy grocery stores, you know, the Erewhon grocery stores where they sell like the $30 smoothies and all the crazy expensive whole goods. I kind of feel like LSU paid Erewhon prices for like Trader Joe's players. You know, Trader Joe's is fine.
Trader Joe's is pretty expensive for my taste too, by the way. I thought you were going to go with like Aldi or maybe like Piggly Wiggly or something.
Aldi's a little bit lower, but Trader Joe's is not Whole Foods. They're not paying Whole Foods prices. You know, it's still a better deal than Publix and some of these other places. And again, it's quality stuff, but it's not like top shelf. And the transfer portal, I think what people are still kind of confused about is that, you know, they see these transfer portal rankings and player rankings and stars and all that kind of stuff, and they're like, we got this former 5-star, this guy or that guy. The portal has been way saturated compared to where it was back in like 2022. 22-23, there was way better players entering the transfer portal, and yet teams and programs are having to pay these top-of-the-line prices, particularly this season, because of the impending house settlement, because of the money that's coming down in terms of like, you know, the potential revenue sharing and that kind of stuff. So I just don't know how good all these portal additions LSU got. You know, they reloaded this secondary. They brought in, you know, the nice pass rusher from Florida State and some of these other guys. But, you know, this isn't Texas Tech where they're getting to play with these guys in the Big 12. They're having to play the SEC.
Yeah, it's like you buy a house that was, you know, 5 years ago worth $450,000, but then the market goes crazy and that same house you're now paying $900,000 for. It's not really a $900,000 house. You're really still buying the $450,000 house. You just paid a lot of money for it. It's still the same house that's good. It's a good one, like you're saying. It's a solid B plus, but it's not that A level. I think a lot of college football fans, you know, saw what Ohio State did last year, and they kept getting kind of beat over the head with most expensive roster. And I think that automatically equated to, hey, if you spend the most money, you're going to have the best team. But like you're saying, in the transfer portal, there was no Caleb Downs this year. There was no Quidshot Junkins. So just because you went out and bought transfer number one or spent a bunch of money, you might not be getting the same quality that other teams have in the past. So I think it's a good comparison. How bad would things have to be for number one Texas to be the answer to this, for them to fall from number one to unranked? Because they kind of tie into what I said about Ohio State. Everyone keeps talking about how expensive that roster is, you know, how expensive, how much they've invested in. I assume, you know, there's a lot of legit blue chip talent on there. It's loaded, but is there a path for Texas to be one of the answers here?
I don't see it, even though I do think the unknown of Arch Manning, you know, he's been in the news again today because his granddaddy came out and said, you know, he's probably not going to be in the draft this next year, to the chagrin of every New Orleans Saints fan. But every week is going to be a referendum, you know, on Arch Manning's legacy and career. You know, how good is he? How bad, you know, what each week. And so if he struggles, could Texas kind of, you know, slide down the SEC rankings and maybe slip out of the top 25? I don't see it because I think their defense is going to be too damn good. You know, I think that when you have Colin Simmons on the edge and Anthony Hill and Malik Muhammad and Taffy at safety, I just think that they're going to be too good on that side of the ball. Similarly to Georgia, basically the floor isn't going to cave in on them, even if they do have kind of, you know, some quarterback issues.
My thing with them, and not to sound like I'm beating a dead horse or that I only have one take, but like, again,
it is 40 acres. You can beat the horses if you want.
It just comes down to how they get started in the season. Like, if you think Texas is going to fall apart, you would point to that first game at Ohio State, and then their second real game is at Florida in the Swamp. So, like, there's a chance that they go 0-2 in those first, power games. And then the third game is a neutral site against Oklahoma. Now, there's 3 bought wins in between Ohio State and Florida, San Jose, UTEP, Sam Houston. Of course, they're going to win there. But, like, if they stumbled against Ohio State and Arch, fell on his face a little bit, because let's face it, like, I'm not completely sold on Arch. I know the name. I know the ranking. I know that he had showed flashes last year, but he showed flashes against some pretty bad teams. I don't think we're too far removed from him kind of being a laughingstock in their spring game last year. When people were like, how is this guy would be a 3-star if his last name wasn't Manning? Look at this terrible release. And then he actually got in the games, ran around, looked pretty good. Now everyone's got him penciled in as, the number 1 pick, whatever year he comes out. I think those 2 first real games at Ohio State, at Florida, and even throw neutral site into Oklahoma, that's a pretty tough start for them if you buy into Florida and you buy into Oklahoma, which I know those teams, some people really like, some think are being overvalued.
I mean, to me, Arch is like the reincarnation of the Dos Equis man. He's not the most interesting man in the world, but he's the most interesting man in college football because, as you just said, he really hasn't done a whole lot, but his name is carrying so much weight that he has been, unburdened, frankly, unfairly, with just absurd expectations. He's the number 1 Heisman Trophy, preseason guy. Like you said, whether it's this year, next year, or whenever, he's projected to be the number 1 overall pick. This is a guy who's barely started, I think, 2 games. If he was as good and as ready as everyone is saying or believes he to be, coming week 1 against Ohio State, then either Steve Sarkisian should have played him last year when they couldn't move the ball against Georgia in Atlanta, and Quinn Ewers was basically playing with a dead arm, there in the playoff, or maybe he isn't ready. And he's going to go through the typical growing pains that a lot of these young quarterbacks go through, which, as you just outlined, makes Texas's early season schedule quite interesting when your first 2 games are, Power 5 games are in 2 of the most hostile stadiums in the country, and going to the Shoe and then playing in the Swamp. Oklahoma's a wild card going, in that Texas. And then you got Georgia, there in Athens in mid-October. So Texas, could stub their toe particularly a lot for a team that's been universally praised as the number 1, preseason team in the country.
Yeah, it just comes down to I think Arch is going to be fine. I do, but I'm not ready to say that he's some elite college quarterback just yet. Like I don't. He's got to prove that to me. And I was looking today, like it just stands out to me that Texas is only 2.5-point underdogs in Columbus. That feels low. Like if you can get Ohio State at home, less than a field goal. I know you're saying
I think that speaks to Ohio State's quarterback uncertainty, doesn't it, John?
Probably.
The fact that Julian Sayin still hasn't been named the starter, that Keinholz is kind of still pushing him there. That's what's crazy. You look at this top 10: Texas, Ohio State, Georgia, Notre Dame, Oregon, Alabama. They're all starting new dudes. And they're all starting new dudes who have not played a lick.
Yeah, like Drew Aller, Nussmeier, and Klubnik being kind of the 3 top returning quarterbacks of the contenders. Save your Lanoris Sellers screaming if you're a South Carolina fan. But like other teams in the top 10, those 3 being the entrenched guys. Klubnik, I think we believe in after last year, but he was up and down a little bit. But I do buy into him this year, but not so much Aller. Got to see more consistency from him, and then like we talked about with Nussmeier, I think he'll ultimately be pretty good. He's a Brian Kelly quarterback, but he left a little bit to be desired in big moments last year. So I don't think you have any entrenched guys that you're 100% sold on, at least maybe outside of Klubnik.
Yeah, no, I agree. And Klubnik, I mean, man, he was seeing ghosts against Georgia,
Yeah.
looking like Sam Darnold on Monday Night Football. But then he was able to turn it around. I think the best thing for Cade is that he's going to be in another season with Riley, with Garrett Riley there offensively. And I really like Clemson. Clemson was wide receiver U when Dabo had that thing humming, and Wesco and I'm blanking on the other kid, Moore. I mean, they got some good receivers there now, which has not been the case for 4 or 5 years.
That week one, I mean, it's a monster week. The coaches poll, the reason that the TV networks like the preseason rankings is you could sell number 1 versus number 2 because the coaches voted Texas and Ohio State there. I imagine the media follows suit there. Would you agree?
Yeah, although I do think that Penn State should be ranked ahead of Ohio State.
Okay.
If you're talking about now, I've long kind of used James Franklin as a bit of a punching bag because I think it's an easy target. But this is not, if it's not now, when for the Nittany Lions and that program, I think under Franklin this season, they have kind of done the Ohio State run it back 2.0 thing where they convinced a bunch of dudes who were, second, third round picks to come back to school and kind of improve that draft stock. So when you have all that known commodity returning on both sides of the ball, I think Colton Nickey is probably one of the best coordinators in the country. You then go steal, Ohio State's defensive coordinator, Jim Knowles, who's been quite, open and salty, even though he won a title with the Buckeyes about his time in Columbus. So I would flip those two. But you're right. I mean, they like the programs love, being able to sell 1 versus 2, and 6 versus whatever it's going to be, 7, 8, 9 with Clemson, LSU.
Next question coming up from Dylan. We're talking top 10 teams. Alabama, loaded with talent. I think it's fair to say their biggest question is at quarterback. He wants to know, do you think Ty Simpson is going to be any good? The silence is deafening.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, if he was this good, I feel like he probably would have gotten a shot by now. This is not, when Greg McElroy or McCarron or these guys, waited around and got their turn. Obviously, Jalen Milroe was there, but Jalen Milroe had his doubters. Jalen Milroe had his skeptics. And Jalen Milroe, was up and down at times a year ago under Kalen DeBoer. So I would lean towards thinking that Ty Simpson, he's got the tools. He has the pedigree, the background. Obviously, you followed his career because it still looked like he was going to go to Tennessee for a while before he ultimately chose the Tide. The biggest, I think, tool probably in his belt this season is the fact that he kind of gets to reunite with Ryan Grubb, who was there briefly, seemed to take a liking to him before he left to go be the Seattle Seahawks offensive coordinator. I think kind of the brain trust there, the 1-2 brain trust of Grubb and Kalen DeBoer is going to help out Ty Simpson. So he's going to have to earn it, though, because that 5-star Keelan Russell is a freak. Austin Mack followed DeBoer from Oregon. So it's not like Washington, so it's not like they don't have some options there. If he is good, I think my prediction that Alabama wins the SEC should be rubber stamped because I think that defense is pretty damn good. And that offensive line is just, you talk about, it's like a dude of monsters.
Well, that's what I was going to ask because I know you're high on Alabama, but to me, to be high on Alabama, you also have to be high on Ty Simpson. But you don't seem like you're super high on him. It sounds like you think he could be passable or maybe even good, but it doesn't seem like you're very confident in that take for him.
Well, I just think Ty Simpson is going to find his water one way or another, mainly because I think everything around Ty Simpson is probably better than almost everywhere else in the country.
Sure.
Jam Miller, great running back. Ryan Williams and those receivers, Gio Bernard, those guys, one of the better receiving corps in the country. Bama probably has the best offensive line in America. So when you just have all those, this is a dude that's basically getting to cook with the best ingredients. He's out here. He's in a Michelin restaurant, and he's got the best head chef in terms of Kalen DeBoer. Being a guy who's worked with a bunch of different quarterbacks. He's got the ingredients. Now it's just him, as the sous chef, making sure this meal gets put together.
Yes, chef. Yes, chef. Is it more embarrassing to not be able to beat out Jalen Milroe last year for Ty Simpson, or Arch Manning not being able to beat out Quinn Ewers at Texas whenever he actually got on the field and got to play a bit?
Well, that's a good question. I would probably say, honestly, Quinn, just because when he got hurt, I mean, that collarbone and that injury, he had zero pop in his arm. It was like the inverse of the Rookie of the Year movie, where that dude was all of a sudden throwing 1,000 miles an hour, and it was like, what? He's got a rubber band arm. Viewers couldn't barely push the ball vertically at all.
The fact that he actually got on the field, talking about Arch, and had a chance to win the job and didn't, it is more red flags to me than Simpson. I know Simpson got a game, whenever Alabama was trying to punish Milroe, and maybe looked like they were going to move on during Saban's year. But yeah, it's funny because the quarterbacks on these top 10 teams, like we just talked about, they all leave a little bit to be desired, or at least most of them do. Outside the top 10, Gabe wants to know, do you think, or how fast will the Lanoris Sellers hype train go completely off the rails?
I don't know if the Lanoris Sellers hype train is going to go off the rails, but I think there's going to be a whole lot of surrender Cobra moments for South Carolina this season.
Those first six games are brutal.
They may be just as good as they were a year ago in terms of quality of a football team. But I don't. The win-loss record's not going to show it. And Beamer's getting a lot of shine out of this new Saturday Netflix special where his program was highlighted, in multiple avenues. But I just think it's going to be a rough year for the Gamecocks.
Please note, I meant the back half, the last 6 games for South Carolina, going to be brutal. Yes. They better hope they handle business in the first 6, because if not, it gets really ugly around October 11th when they got to go to LSU, followed up by Oklahoma, Alabama, at Ole Miss, at A&M, and then, Coastal Carolina before they play Clemson. So like that, they could be, like you said, just as good and still an 8-4 program, or an 8-4 team. That's a tough draw for them.
Yeah, and this is a fan base that's saying, "Hey, we just won 9 games a year ago. Should have made the playoff. Why can't we win, double digit and make the playoffs?" So, I frankly, I kind of feel the same way about SMU. This is a team that I like Rhett Lashley. I like what he's done, with the Mustangs, but they're a team that kind of surprised some folks to get all the way to the ACC championship game a year ago. Now they're thinking, hey, can we get back there? Can we make the playoff? Well, suddenly they got Miami and Clemson on the schedule, which they didn't have last season. And they still have to play TCU and an upstart Baylor team early in the year.
Our boy SEC Mike put together this breakdown, but I do think it's worth mentioning. Just he outlined from the coaches poll each SEC's number of ranked games that they have, ranked opponents that they have. Auburn, Missouri, and Tennessee all have it pretty easy. They have it pretty good, all things considered, only playing 3 ranked teams. Alabama, Ole Miss, and Texas get 4 each, which I think that for Texas, that's a little misleading. Like Texas has a pretty maybe a full standard deviation of a tougher schedule this year than they did last year. I feel like when you look at the home and road kind of being inverse, and then of course picking up Ohio State, I thought they had a joke of a schedule last year. I don't necessarily feel that way about Texas this year, despite them only playing 4 ranked opponents in the preseason. Georgia, South Carolina, A&M, Vanderbilt have 5 each. Arkansas, Kentucky, LSU have 6 each. Florida, Oklahoma, Mississippi State play 7 ranked opponents on their schedules. What jumps out to you the most?
I mean, obviously everyone knows about the difficulty with Florida. I would say the Arkansas deal is at least worth mentioning that this is why everyone believes that, good old Sam Pittman has, was able to kind of save his job and keep Bobby at arm's length from kind of taking over. But with that schedule, man, this has got kind of the last sunset season, I think, for old Sam for the Razorbacks.
If you had to rank the hot seat list in the SEC, maybe Hugh Freeze is in your top 4, top 2, somewhere there. But otherwise, I think, Napier at Florida, Venables at Oklahoma, Pittman at Kentucky, Pittman at Arkansas, Kentucky, Stoops, and even Brian Kelly at LSU. To me, that's kind of, 5 guys that seem like they're kind of teetering there, and they play, the toughest schedules in the league. 6 ranked opponents and 7 ranked opponents for all 5 of those guys.
I do wonder, having not seen this graphic, I do wonder how maybe some of these things would change in terms of difficulty. Arkansas's, I think, would probably be even harder. Texas would obviously get an extra one, but Oklahoma finished 26th in that coaches poll. They were the number 1 team in terms of receiving votes. I frankly was a little bit surprised that they didn't make the rankings, just because I do feel like they've been one of the hypier teams of the offseason. But if they're on there, then suddenly, some of these teams, LSU's got another ranked team on that list, and the schedule looks even more daunting just because another team's got a little crooked number next to their name.
Yeah, and Missouri, Tennessee, and Auburn would all pick up a 4th ranked opponent as well because they're all on Oklahoma's schedule. But like you said, yeah, LSU would go up to 7. I guess Arkansas, they don't play Arkansas, so that wouldn't affect that.
They don't play Arkansas.
Yeah,
okay.
They don't play Arkansas, but yeah, Oklahoma. Obviously it's the same schedule as it was last year for the most part, but really should have a grievance with the SEC for the difficult nature they were welcomed to the league with.
Yeah, I mean, this has been a program that I think we've joked is been recession proof, but they look like they're about to hit a recession here if Venables doesn't really figure it out. They're banking somewhat. We've talked about these quarterbacks and the unknowns and whatever. I mean, you bring in John Mateer, and we joked about him in our first little, back and forth episode. He's a Tasmanian devil, and he's a wild card. He may throw 5 touchdowns, and he may fumble it 5 times or throw 5 interceptions. So. But they're banking on kind of the, Arbuckle Mateer combination of resuscitating an offense that was downright abysmal a year ago.
All right, last question comes from Tech. He wants us to play a little rapid fire for SEC coaches and their ultimate fate, retired, fired, or hired, which I kind of feel like when you say ultimate fate, almost everybody gets fired eventually, right? Like almost everybody gets showed the door. So maybe instead of ultimate, let's just say, the next 4 years, and instead of retired, we'll say, still at the school, or we'll say still at the school instead of retired, because I don't think there's any SEC coaches outside of Saban, who of course is gone, who is a retirement risk right now, right? I mean, maybe Kirby, if he won 3 national championships, he'd say goodbye, but there's nobody with 1 foot out the door. It doesn't feel like, right?
Yeah, if we're sticking this in the next 4 or 5 years, I would say nobody. If you're going further than 5, I could absolutely see Kirby being a guy who he burns the candle so hard that I could see him retiring early. Because I don't think Kirby's going to go coach anywhere else, and he's never at risk of getting fired.
Right, I really thought for a second that he might be tempted by the NFL. I did think that maybe the Falcons or Jaguars job down there maybe would have appealed to him, that he might have had that itch, but yeah, it doesn't seem like he has that at all. So like you said, 4 years, not going anywhere. 7 years though, 8 years, I could see Kirby being done by then.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, we were just talking about Oklahoma. Let's start with them. Brent Venables over the next 4 years.
I don't know
by someone else? or staying home.
I don't know if the man's making it past this next season. So I believe he will be fired. I believe he will get the Will Muschamp resuscitation bounce, though, because he is well liked in the industry. That it may not be another, P4 program right away, but I do think he'll probably be a head coach again. But I think, he's ultimately going to get fired at Oklahoma.
Lane Kiffin.
Move on to another Power 4 job.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, I know that folks around him say that he's at peace now. That Auburn deal was real. He wanted to go to Auburn. It just, the finances and that kind of stuff just didn't kind of work itself out. And so would you be stunned if Lane Kiffin was the head coach at USC again in 4 years?
At USC, yes. Yes, I would be stunned. I think it's more likely he'd be hired at Alabama than USC, just to be honest. Like, maybe that's a bad take, but I feel like the people.
Alabama's a great choice. That's a great choice. What about Miami? The man loves to be on a boat,
Yeah.
I think he'll be another job.
Yeah, I mean, if I guess I just figured since Miami chased Cristobal for so long, they wouldn't fire him anytime soon. But I know you're calling him a fraud, so maybe it goes sideways. I mean, hell, even Florida, I guess, if Billy Napier gets fired, I would imagine they'd be at least somewhat interested in talking to Lane Kiffin. So, okay, I think I would pick he's still at Mississippi because the chips haven't fallen early enough in the process for him to get that next job. Then eventually you just plant your roots and you stay and you become just the Mississippi guy. And I think that's maybe where he's at right now. It'll be interesting to see. I don't think he gets fired, though. I think he's got a pretty cushy gig.
They'll build Kiffin a statue if he takes him to the playoff. But but the man still likes to get cut a fresh check. So
yeah,
he's had a wandering eye for a long time.
Shane Beamer
fired. And I say that because history basically says if you go to South Carolina, you got hired to get fired. I don't have the exact statistics right in front of me. Folks can do their own Googling, but I believe basically since World War II, they've had one or two coaches ever get hired there and then move on to another job. Obviously the SEC, the dynamics there aren't that many programs and jobs that are better than South Carolina. And yet it's still basically a fringe top 20 job because you are so low down the totem pole of the SEC. Shane's not going to leave, but I do think Shane, as he talked about it pretty candidly in this docuseries, he thought he was on the risk of getting fired a year ago. So we're talking the next, 3 to 5 years. I think Shane Beamer is going to get fired.
I definitely think he was on the hot seat last year going into it. I do think he was very close to getting fired. It's crazy how quickly he kind of changed his status there. But I do feel like one good season at South Carolina kind of resets the clock. An extra 2 years versus what other SEC fan bases allow. So if it's 4 years, I'd say Beamer's probably still there, but he'd probably be going into that fourth year on the really, really hottest seat that you could have.
I just think that there's so much coaching turnover these days, John, that, the carousel just never stops spinning. I just think the shelf life for 4 years is a hell of a long time.
Yeah. Yeah.
So as well as Shane Beamer, did do this past season, he's also just, like we said, 18 months removed from thinking that the guillotine was coming down on his neck anyways.
Mark Stoops.
Retired. I don't think people understand how much money Mark Stoops, A, has made just from coaching, and B, is also sitting on a pile of money because basically he's been investing in bourbon for the last X amount of years up in Kentucky. And so that man he's loaded. I think if Kirk Ferentz, retired from Iowa this fall and that job opened where Stoops could maybe make kind of a lateral transition and go back to his alma mater and do that, maybe it would be retire at Kentucky or leave Kentucky. But for now, I'll just say retire.
Yeah, I thought when Kirk got in all that trouble, or we thought he was heading into trouble with the way he was treating or was accused of treating his black players, that maybe he was headed
that got
out.
buried fast, huh?
Yeah, I thought he was headed out and that Stoops would take that job, but here we are, 3-4 years later, and no one cares about it at Iowa anymore. And Stoops, doesn't have as bright of a name as he did a couple years ago when he, was in the mix for Florida State and even A&M last year. I don't know if another school besides Iowa would want to come hire him away. Stoops, to me, feels a little bit like Philip Fulmer without the national championship and SEC titles at least. But at a school for a long time, they kind of get sick of him. He goes away and never gets another job again. It kind of feels like Stoops is, if it's not Iowa at this point, I think he would just be done coaching, like you said.
Yeah. Again, he's made a ton of money. He's made a ton of money.
I didn't know he had all that money in the bourbon business.
Oh yeah. And so that's and he's sitting on a nice investment there.
Josh Heupel.
This one's tough. I want you to go first on this one.
4 years, I think. All right, let's just go through this. I think the only school that would be a threat to hire him away would be Oklahoma. But the way people talk about it is that there's still too much bad blood there between the way Josh Heupel feels about Oklahoma and the way that he was kind of treated, being the scapegoat, for baby Stoops all those years ago. So, I don't know if Oklahoma called, if he would want to go home. But would you agree that that'd be the only hire away threat for Tennessee?
I definitely agree that'd be the only threat, although I don't think Oklahoma really is a threat. I do think the blood is bad enough there. I think for as long as Bob Stoops is involved with that OU program, and the fact that Joe Constiglione, their longtime AD, is retiring this year, there's kind of a power vacuum there. Stoops isn't going to be the AD, but I think he's going to be able to kind of swing an even bigger stick kind of around that program behind the scenes. I just don't think Heupel wants anything to do with that. So if they're off the board, then I think it's pretty much either retire or fire. I don't think he's going to retire. So
I think he would, again, if we're just looking at the next 4 years, it would have to go really sideways for him to burn up all his goodwill. Now, you said it, 4 years is a hell of a long time. But the only, I think, failing grade for the majority of the Tennessee fan base is, starts at 7-5 this year. 8-4, I think people would be pretty content with, especially if it's because the quarterback play isn't good enough, because I think a lot of people will give him a pass for that based on what happened with, Nico. Now, you could also counter, if you're looking to be negative, and say, should we be looking at that as an anomaly? Or should we be looking at hey, maybe Hendon Hooker's the anomaly, and that, the Aguilar or Merklinger would be the third straight quarterback that underperformed with Josh Heupel in this offense. That would be what the detractors would say. But again, to get the ball rolling on this, you'd have to go at least 7-5 or worse to get people upset this year. If he doesn't do that, next year that would maybe go to 8-4. It would maybe be a little unacceptable, but then you'd have to really slip to the 7-5 and 6-6 level before he would get fired in 4 years. And I just don't see that path for things getting that bad at Tennessee. I do think the recruiting has been too good for him when it comes, being compared to the other mid-tier teams. Kentucky's not closing ground on him. Missouri's not closing ground on him. You could say South Carolina maybe is, but, I don't know. I feel like Tennessee's closing the gap between them and Alabama more so than South Carolina is to Tennessee, or at least at an equal part. So I would say retire, of course, / stay home is where I would ultimately lean.
Yeah, I think it would probably have, as you just kind of outlined it there, and just thinking, with your commentary, they would have to run. Tennessee would have to run 4 straight 7-5 seasons, I think, for them to kind of roll him out. I think he is so attached to the hip of Danny White. Now, if Danny White leaves Tennessee, if they have a power vacuum there at the AD position, does that create some turbulence potentially? But that's going far too down the rabbit hole for what this question's asking. So we'll say stay / retire.
Yeah, and it also seems like Danny White, if you did that for him. Like he's got no reason to leave Tennessee. He's a king here, and he's really, trying to prop up that whole everything school. And I do think there's very, very few schools that could come close to making him look as good as an AD in terms of being good at every sport. So I think those two would still both be here in 4 years. Any other coach you want to get on record that I didn't mention? I don't want to go through all 16, but is there anybody you find?
Yeah, I mean, well, Drink, I would say fired, just because, again, I just think that's what history would say. I think the surprising one here, because you mentioned him, and I do think that he's a guy who legitimately should be on some hot seat lists, is one Mr. Brian Kelly. And I'm going to say retire. I'm going to say not fired.
Really?
I'm going to say that in one of the next 4 years, LSU wins a national championship and he retires.
Okay, that's a pretty good prediction. I wasn't expecting that. Now, on one hand, everybody's won a championship at LSU, it feels like, since the 2000s. Like, every coach has gotten it done, and there's been a lot dumber coaches. Looking at, Orgeron and Les Miles. Yeah. Both those guys dumber than Brian Kelly, but also those guys felt they felt immune to pressure. And Brian Kelly feels the opposite of immune to pressure. Like, Les Miles is eating grass. Ed Orgeron's chugging Red Bull. Neither one really knew what the hell was going on. I think Brian Kelly is the opposite. I think he's too painfully aware of all the pressure and everything going on. And that's why you see his teams choke at LSU.
Hey, you're not wrong. But, hey, man, the clock strikes 12 twice. So I think eventually the clock's going to hit it right.
Okay. I like that prediction. All right, one more question. I lied on the way out. Nathan wants to know, do you think the SEC and Big Ten are heading towards an inevitable non-NCAA football league where they can do whatever rules they want? I know this has been the big talk the last 3 or 4 years. It kind of slowed down, came to a screeching halt. We haven't really been talking about that too much lately, but it's always just one bad move away from the NCAA before it all comes crashing down again. Do you think we're ultimately headed to the SEC and Big Ten starting a NFL junior?
Like the AFC, NFC? Yeah.
Yeah, basically, yeah.
I do. And it will not be exclusive, I don't think, just to those two conferences, but it will be a super conference that also includes the likes of Miami, Clemson, Florida State. I think Yormark out in the Big 12 is doing his damnedest to make sure that, his league doesn't get left in the dust, which is why he, on the one hand, basically, I think is almost self-sabotaging his own league because he can't actually admit that, the stupid 4-2-2 whatever playoff model that they should deserve just two, guaranteed playoff spots, because if he says that out loud, then he is admitting that his conference is in fact a weaker conference. And so the fact that he seems to be semi-teaming up with the SEC for, this 5 and 11, at-large teams is crazy, but that's just kind of where we are. I do think this is maybe something that's, 5-10 years down the road, but it certainly seems like thinking that the boulder is not being pushed uphill otherwise is just insane. I mean, that thing's rolling down and headed towards this at a seemingly faster pace, I think, every offseason.
Yeah, it's a real catch-22 for the Big 12. They need to admit they're inferior and just take the deal, but taking the deal is them admitting they're inferior and makes the SEC and Big Ten not want to be involved with them. It is a catch-22. All right, Jesse, enjoyed the conversation. If you want to get some questions in for next week, just feel free to tweet Jesse or tweet myself, or you can DM us, send us your questions. We'll do it again next week if the people want it, if the people like it. Anything you want to get off your chest before we go?
No, man, I'm good. The season's getting here fast. I'm ready for it. Like you said, we've kind of done the early shells. Now we're putting on the pads, getting the helmets lathered up, and let's get going.
Do you have any intel at all on Tennessee? Anybody you're talking to behind the scenes about the quarterback battle? Because it does seem after 1 week that this is the first true quarterback battle that Tennessee's had in a long, long time to see who's going to get any starting reps. Do you have any insight there?
So I have not talked to anyone yet about that. I'm someone that now that I've been kind of removed from it, I think letting basically through that first scrimmage is when you can actually start to kind of, I think, really calibrate takes. So let's see how this first scrimmage goes, and then let's see. And I think that would be a great jumping off point maybe for next week for you and I to lead with that, and then kind of discuss the upside of if it is a true battle. Do you go with Aguilar because you're trying to get back to the playoff and you think he provides a better floor, or do you roll with the young kid and some of the mistakes because he's going to be around potentially for more than one season?
But then, is that even a good thing, having him around more than one season? Does it scare off your number one quarterback, Faison Brandon, from the next class? Like, it's an interesting dance that Josh Heupel and the team has to do. So, yeah, we'll talk about that next week. Jesse, appreciate you, brother. Talk to you then.
Yeah, man.